while John is speaking, and then you can unmute in case you have a question or you want to make a comment, which we will do after the presentation. Please use the chat only to ask a question, and then I will ask you to unmute your mics and turn your cameras on so you can ask your question to John. Sadly, we do not have translation. This is a systemic problem that we really have to fix, and I apologize for that. And once again, I will not be using or looking at the raise hand buttons. I'm not able to look at raise hands and chat. It's just too much for me, too much technology. So on that very positive note, we are going to hear from our featured speaker, John Stackhouse, who is Senior Vice President of the Royal Bank of Canada. He provides thought leadership, and I think for a moment when he started at RBC, he was actually called Head of Thought Leadership or something like that. And I said to myself, what a cool title, what a cool job. It's probably the coolest job in Canada. And today we have asked him to provide his perspectives on two sides of one coin, immigration and emigration. So sort of writ largely Canada's place in the world. John is, of course, well known in Canada on matters from innovation to economic disruption to prosperity. He was previously editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail. He spent a lot of years in India, and so he comes to this job with sort of a global framework, which I think is very welcome. He is a senior fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute and the Monk School of Global Affairs. He sits on the board of Queen's University, the Aga Khan Foundation of Canada, and the Literary Review of Canada. He's going to talk to us about two ideas that I believe coalesce in a vision of Canada as we recover, and not just recover, but prosper into the future. One is anchoring Canada's future as a place of education for people who come to Canada and for Canadian universities in other parts of the world. And the second is a very interesting perspective on the number of Canadian expatriates around the world and why we don't deploy them or why we should deploy them. The only time we seem to speak about them, today there was an article in the newspaper about the voting rights of expatriates, and that is important, but they can do so much more for us than simply vote. But I am not as qualified as John to speak about these. So over to you, John, if you could provide us with your thoughts in about 10, 12 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers.
Great. Well, thank you, Ratna, for the invitation. It's as hard as this environment is and taxing on all of us. It's a real lift in my spirits to see you and many of my other friends and colleagues, former colleagues, on this call. So connectivity, even when remotely, has a value. And thanks also for recognizing my time in India. This is Republic Day for those of you who know your India. So I pause to reflect. In fact, even reflect jealously as I look at snow out my window here in Toronto. I have fond memories of those sunny Republic Days during my years in Delhi. Ratna, you have forced me, as you often do, to really think beyond where I had been thinking. I've written this book, which is just out, called Planet Canada, which is about Canada's expats, I call it our 11th province. And I'll talk a bit about that. But Ratna convinced me to also make this about the movement of people into Canada, about emigration and immigration. And that's helped me think more about the need for really a people strategy. Sorry, I'm just having a slight audio glitch here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to go off my earpiece there and talk to the phone. So this should be a conversation about a talent strategy. And the pandemic has taught us many things, and we're still in the depths of it, so we shouldn't jump to great conclusions. But one of the lessons, certainly from an economics point of view, of this crisis is the value of knowledge-based sectors, knowledge-based jobs,
and education in a pandemic, but in all likelihood, a post-pandemic economy. The biggest variable that we see in our economics analysis of displacement and disruption in this crisis is education. You've heard a lot about sort of the gender bias of this crisis, that women have been affected more than men. That's absolutely true. But an even greater variable is education. Women with a higher education are doing okay through this crisis. It's women with only a high school education who are not in those knowledge-based jobs of the future, who are really struggling because their relevance is being displaced by technology, which we're all coming to grips with in a more accelerated fashion. So talent is going to be even more essential, not just collectively, but individually in the years to come. And it's going to matter a lot to Canada. We've got huge challenges to help people who have been displaced shift to and develop the skills that will be in demand. There's I've been on calls in the digital Davos this week, and there's some really interesting insights coming there about how to shift millions of people from jobs and sectors that won't come back, not robustly like they were before, to more robust sectors. But this also forces us and opens the door, really, because it's an opportunity for us as a country to think about a talent strategy, and frankly, to think more strategically about people and talent than we have in the past as Canadians. It means we need to be more acutely aware of the kind of people and skills and capabilities that we want in the 2020s and 2030s, and that includes people moving out of Canada as well as coming in, because one of the core arguments of my book really is that we live in an age of networks. And again, the pandemic has brought this home to roost. While institutions, with all due respect to the Senate, while institutions are still fundamental to our society, especially our democratic society, we live in an age of networks where networks are more powerful in many ways than institutions. If you look at the past year, Black Lives Matter, Greta Thunberg and her network, these are powerful global forces, more powerful than many institutions. And that says to me that Canada has an opportunity to build and invest in the people networks, both at home and abroad, that can enhance our interests in a more disruptive age. So let me talk a bit about what the opportunities are, both from emigration and immigration, because also as a country, we need to think about the flow of people. Emigration is not about brain drain. I also argue this in the book. I hate that term, brain drain. We live in a world of brain circulation. Someone leaving Canada needn't be a loss to Canada unless we let that be a loss to Canada. They can be more valuable to us anywhere in the world than they might be on Canadian soil if we think in terms of networks. It's the same with people moving here. How do we multiply, to use a Silicon Valley term, 10x the power of each of us as Canadians, whether we're on Canadian soil or off, to be a country of 40 million or 80 million, whatever our ambition is, but to really have the influence, the impact of a country of 400 million or 4 billion. That's the power of networks. So let me talk first about Planet Canada and this idea of strategic emigration. Most Canadians have no idea that there are 2 to 3 million Canadians living, working, and studying outside this country. Most of them doing incredible things. They're at the top of their game. Some of the world's top universities right now, Cambridge, Stanford, and Johns Hopkins, are run by Canadians. And as I worked on this book over the last 5 years, sort of my part-time job, in addition to my role at RBC, every day I'd be talking to Canadians all over the world doing incredible things, people I'd never heard of, having a huge impact. And as a country, I realized we're just missing the strategic boat here by not helping them work for Canada, no matter where they are. I actually got onto this idea when I was living in India in the 1990s. Would bump into Canadians, meet Canadians in the most interesting places, doing often the most unlikely of things. And then when I moved back, I paid more attention to the policy side of the issue, especially when governments started to chip away at the rights of overseas Canadians. And this was understandably a reaction to 9/11 and an increasingly security conscious world. But it was really kind of penny wise, pound foolish in terms of cutting off this strategic asset to the country. We editorialized about this when I was at the Globe. And then when I left the Globe, I spent some time at the Monk School. I'm still associated with the Monk School at U of T. Built a research team that started to develop databases showing where Canadians are. We used Facebook data as well to show globally where the population is. Interviewed hundreds of Canadians around the world, finding clusters of them in Hollywood, as you would know, or Silicon Valley, but also in places like Nashville and Dubai and Beirut, doing incredible things, but not doing incredible things for Canada. And the deeper I got into this, the more I realized, boy, we're leaving a lot on the table here. But the real light bulb moment for me was when we started to study what other countries were doing and saw, and there's a full chapter on this in the book, pretty much every country in the world has a diaspora or an expat strategy, except for us. And there are many similar countries, Australia, France, India is an incredible leader in this space, working very ambitiously with their global populations. But smaller countries too, Israel, Singapore, Taiwan, all kind of learn by experience that trying to get people to move back, which is often a Canadian habit, they come on home. And that's fine. I've got nothing against trying to get people to move back, but most aren't going to move back. That's been the experience through generations across the world. These other countries are working actively in this age of networks with their people, and they are their people in their government's minds around the world, whatever they're doing, to advance their collective standing in the world. So an enormous opportunity for us here, and plenty we can learn from those other countries we can get into in the discussion. So what do we do about it? Well, first of all, we've got to recognize this population, which was the main reason I wrote the book, is to celebrate this community, this hidden province of ours. But we can recognize them too. I recommend creating the equivalent of an Order of Canada for international citizens. France does this with great success, as does India. Help bring the best and the brightest back, not just for a ceremony, but to spend a couple of days brainstorming with folks like you on the line, but with all our government leaders, our corporate leaders, our academic leaders. We need to learn from them. Next, we need to review the rights and responsibilities and have just a clearer deal with people around the world, Canadians around the world. What do we expect from you and what do you expect from us? Whether it's passports or voting, as you mentioned, Ratna, taxation, access to social services. No right or wrong on any of these fronts, but we do need to come to it more holistically and confidently from a policy perspective. Thirdly, invest in networks, and governments can do this. There's a chapter in the book on the C100 in Silicon Valley, which is a real model of how it can be done. It needs to be done differently in different places. The Valley is a unique culture, but it shows what private Canadian citizens working with government leaders, Stuart Beck, when he was Consul General, and in years subsequently, have been great allies of the C100. So it shows that kind of Team Canada approach that we need to invest in, and then create networks in Canada to access these global populations. I'm struck in my conversations with Canadians, whether it's with university students who are so energized by this conversation, or corporate leaders, or university councils and boards that I speak to, that they have not only not an understanding, but no collective ability to plug into these global networks, even in their own space. So how do we help Canadians take advantage of that? That takes me to the second part of the conversation, and then I'll quickly try to connect them and turn it over to a conversation. Immigration cannot be seen separately from this, because we live in an age, and the pandemic may seem to have stopped this. It has not. It's paused and in some ways accelerated trends that were already underway, where we will get back to an age of international mobility, of people leaving and coming back, especially in those high-skilled jobs where people can work anywhere for anyone at any time. I'll get to how the pandemic is raising the stakes there. But we need to think more holistically of immigration as part of a talent strategy, just as immigration needs to be part of our talent strategy. When we get back to immigration more confidently and robustly, how do we view it as our talent strategy? for the 2020s and beyond. Let me share a couple of insights that we've garnered at RBC in our analysis of immigration trends through the pandemic. Obviously, a big interruption. Not as much, though, as many, including I would have thought going back to the lockdowns of spring. Part of this is permanent residents who are already here, so moving through the system, so that skews the numbers a little bit. Students have come in bigger numbers than frankly, many universities and colleges expected, not at 100%, but more than might have been the case. And then temporary foreign workers, God bless them for stepping up to many of the challenges that we know all too well about. But this is going to continue to be a challenge in 2021. It's not like there's going to be a light switch moment and immigration is back on in full. It's going to take us a while to get back to the numbers where we were, in part because of just breakages in the system, and in part because of a bit of a freezing in global mobility in different parts of the world over the next, which will continue over the next year. And we also may have some domestic social resistance, which tends to be common. I've seen this cycle a number of times when unemployment is higher. Public attitudes towards immigration tends to become a little more hesitant. But as we come out of this crisis, I want to wrap up by going back to that point I began with. We need to be fully aware of the skills economy that was taking hold before the pandemic. We did a big study that many of you know about in 2018 called Humans Wanted, that looked at the skills revolution that was really part of the fourth industrial revolution. That's accelerating through the crisis. And we think we could see an acceleration of demand for those high value skills towards the back half of this year, to an extent where there's going to be shortages of a lot of workers in key sectors, especially those knowledge-based sectors, which are going to lead the world in growth. It's going to become an even greater challenge because people who do those jobs, almost by definition, can do them from anywhere. So they may want to do them from Canada for employers elsewhere in the world, or they may want to stay elsewhere in the world for a host of reasons and do it for a Canadian organization. The global high-end labor market is going to shift coming out of this crisis, which means we as a country, again, to get back to that point I've stressed a couple of times, need to be much more strategic about talent, about being whether we're a country of 40 million or 80 million, ensuring that we have the talent mix, the skills mix, to really thrive in a skills economy that's going to be more technology rooted, more mobility minded, a little more regional, less global. We can get to that, and much more competitive than we might have seen in years past. So the opportunity is there for us as a country. We remain a destination of choice for people who want to move to another country, especially skilled individuals. We also remain a country that our skilled people, when they leave the country, deeply, deeply love and want to help and want to engage with. And I'll wrap up with the story of a remarkable Canadian who took me a lot of convincing to get her to talk, because she stays away from the limelight. Her name is Shona Brown, and she's a leading executive in Silicon Valley. Rhodes Scholar, terrific talent, was a hotshot at McKinsey, became one of the early executives at Google, and helped propel them in their early years of significant growth. And Shona's now on the boards of multinational companies, doing all sorts of interesting things, still living in the Valley. And when I finally convinced her to talk to me for the book, she said, you know, I do, and she's very humble, know that I'm among a small number of people in the world who has a global expertise in this area of technology. And you know how many times the Canadian government, and this is not a political statement because she's been there for 20 years, has called me? Zero. And that's just one of scores of examples I came across in my interviews around the world of deeply committed, patriotic Canadians who aren't going to move back, but want to help Canada, want to stay Canadian wherever they are, And that's now our advantage. If we can just turn to that and think, as I said, strategically about talent, about Canadian talent, wherever it is in the world in the years ahead. Ratna, thank you again for the conversation, and as always, your stimulating thoughts spurring this on.
Thank you so much, John. We could listen to you for a lot longer. We have a number of questions lined up, and I'd like to make sure we get to them quickly. But John, perhaps you can explain a little bit more, and this was completely wonderful, but I'm curious about your proposal for a Canada U. Would that bring Canadian institutions in partnership with the educational institutions overseas to showcase both our education and attract people to Canada, or would these simply be, branches of McGill in Bangalore or wherever?
No, thanks for raising that, Rana. Yeah. This is bringing platform thinking to higher education, but really to this idea of talent. I've talked about the need for networks and strategic Canadian networks. Networks thrive when they're on a platform. So how do we build a Canadian platform? We put out a paper on this and we nicknamed it Canada U. We said would be a digital platform that would host the best of Canadian post-secondary education. And there's many ways to operate this. We're just raising the concept so that wherever you are in the world, you can sign up for Canada U, be like the BBC of higher education. And there's plenty of great franchises on BBC and different programs, different even channels, but everyone in the world knows the BBC. So how do we have this Canadian brand out there that's even greater than a U of T or a McGill or UBC, which are terrific brands, and say Canada is a global leader in post-secondary education. If you want a world-class post-secondary education, no matter what the field is, come to Canada U, and then maybe pick up pieces from different universities. So it's a menu approach for your initial phase. Maybe you do a year of transition. You may not want to leave your home country for a bunch of reasons, but you can do a collection of Canadian courses and come to think, okay, I really like McGill rather than U of T, or Centennial College I'm more attached to. And that can be, it's like a gateway to Canada. You become familiar with the institution, you get to sample it, and yes, build your credits towards a degree or a diploma or a certificate, and then make the move. This becomes an advantage for Canada in a number of ways. It casts a wide net, so we're doing really well at attracting students here from around the world. This casts an even wider net for us to bring in those students. It allows universities to monetize their offerings to people who may not want to move here. Some of them may choose to just stay where they are, and we can work out what they get as a result. But it allows us to scale education in a way beyond the numbers that we would bring here. Let's say 500,000 a year. This allows us to provide higher education to, let's say, 5 million a year rather than 500. Just the 500,000 who come here.
Excellent. Thank you. We have questions lined up. I'm going to open the floor. This is the order of the questions. Please unmute yourself and unmute your video so John can both look at you and listen to you. Starting off the top, Senator Meiji, followed by Senator Coyle, Senator Lafreda, Senator Jaffer, and Senator Ataullah John. Senator Meiji, over to you.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I have a question for you. Among 2 or 3 million Canadians who work abroad, how many are them from this country where they're located in?
That's a great question. One of the challenges I raised in the book is we're very poor at data collection on our global population. The Asia Pacific Foundation has done terrific work on this front. I hope that my book adds to our knowledge base, but we've got to get much better at studying the locations of Canadians and the origins, as you point out. We don't know the answer to that. There's significant numbers in Hong Kong and Beirut, but also a number of other centers, and this has become whether you call them hyphenated Canadians or a double diaspora. Dubai is another big center for duals. A strategic asset for Canada, because there are very few countries that have the experience that we do in dual citizenship and the ability of people to move fluidly, very fluidly, but not just between geographies, but between cultures. There's an even greater strategic asset, though, for us, which is the children of immigrants. And this is going to be a major force for Canada in the 2020s. Our immigration, as many of you know, really accelerated in the early 90s. And the millions of people who came to Canada in the late 80s, 90s, early 2000s, many of them had children. Those children are now 20-somethings. Those children are coming out of our colleges and universities in massive numbers. And they have a global sensibility that is unlike anything the world has seen. This is a purely digital first generation, but a generation that grew up in multicultural households and environments and is so comfortable with it. Their ability to work out in the world is extraordinary. And as a country, I think this can be a real asset for us in the years ahead. It's not just mobilizing this global population, it's thinking about mobilizing the millennials and Gen Zers of our global population.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Coyle.
Hello. Thank you, Ratna. And nice to see you, John.
Good to see you.
I remember meeting with you back in my Calmetto days when you were heading off to India. It seems like yesterday. Anyway, my question is, and it's really a comment and a question, and this is about, my own background has been in international development. One of the things that I've found very short-sighted about some of the directions Canada has been moving in the international development realm is that it's gotten away from that recognition of investment in talent and the importance of those talent networks internationally to accomplish the international development mission, but also to connect back in with Canada. For example, just to give you two quick examples. One is the limitations of a results-based management framework, which looks strictly to X plus Y equals Z, and here's your output from this, instead of looking, for instance, when I was in Afghanistan, who were the leaders in Afghanistan in the microfinance sector? It was the Filipinos, it was the Bangladeshis, it were people that had been actually supported by Canada and are then carrying out a mission that Canada was in favor of and supporting, but quite separately in Afghanistan. Same with the International Development Research Center that created this incredible worldwide network of well-trained scholars, researchers around the world. And I feel very strongly that Canada has not harnessed those talent networks either, which are a little different from the talent networks that you're talking about.
No, that's a great point. Thanks for sharing it, and a very fair criticism of results-based measurements and the curse of those, which all of us in organizations should be mindful of. It's often the enemy of good strategy because people then engineer to the measurement, and regardless of the cost to the strategy, and that may have happened to us. In terms of being able to enhance a people strategy.
Yeah, and just to see, when you're talking about this strategy for Canadian immigrants and immigrants, I think I just wanted to suggest that there's also this other huge network that have been touched, by Canada in one way or another, that is also a pool of talent, another group, another network of assets to bring to the equation that you're talking about. I really like the way you're going with this, and for us to kind of take the lid off of all of these boxes, which is what you're challenging us to do, and look at the whole and see how we interconnect and how together in different ways we can, really maximize the impact of those various networks.
No, thank you. Wonderful comments.
Senator Lufreda.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for your presentation. And as I said off the top, always nice to see a former colleague. I am reading your book, so very interesting. And thank you for that. I have a question on inventors. I was looking, and I think you spoke about it also, immigrant inventors and emigrant inventors. If we look at Canada, our ratio is we have 2 times more inventors leaving Canada than coming into Canada. And if we look at the US, the US has 10 times more inventors going into the US as they have leaving the US. So I'm wondering, is that strictly because of intellectual property legislation? Is there something we can do in Canada to change that ratio? And you did say there's, we talk a lot about Canadians that have had success outside of Canada and they're not coming back. You made a comment, they come back for a conference, or they come back. How can we bring some of those successful entrepreneurs back to Canada, maybe to start subsidiaries, companies, invest, come back and create jobs? And last but not least, my last question is, we talk a lot about education. And I've talked a lot to a lot of the business boards and some conferences lately, and many entrepreneurs tell us that there's a lack of skilled labor, and immigration should concentrate on skilled labor. Meanwhile, we feel that obviously for the right reasons, education is being prioritized. But how do you feel about that? What's your feeling on that point? So thank you.
Great questions. Really great questions. Let me just bite them off one at a time, Tony. So the inventor and innovation complex of Canada, that could be a whole conversation or series of conversations. Yes, the IP culture matters. The ecosystem, having dynamic communities, creative clusters, as Richard Florida wrote, are really important where inventors can thrive. I think we're getting much better at that in Canada, but there are places in the U.S. that are truly special compared to anything in the world. Silicon Valley being one of them. Often people leave, and people leave even within the United States to move to another region. And this is very true of inventors and entrepreneurs. They're restless. They tend to be disruptive thinkers, and therefore just don't want to settle down for the status quo, maybe that their parents or their community has. And this really dawned on me the more I spoke to Canadians in different places, where they said it was a wonderful Canadian in the Valley, Chamath Palihapitiya, who was a successful executive, one of the early executives of Facebook, made hundreds of millions of dollars, now runs a social capital, venture capital firm. And Chamath, child of Sri Lankan refugees, scholarship to University of Waterloo engineering, said, I owe everything to Canada. I am who I am because of Canada, but I could not live, or I could not stay in Canada because I did not fit in. And he's not blaming Canada for that, although he said, sometimes Canada is a little too complacent. They said he just needed to break away. And I found this among Canadians in all sorts of places. They just needed to get out. They were misfits in wherever it is they grew up. And we shouldn't be upset about that, but rather try to stay connected with them. So how do we say to a Chamath, stay in the Valley, because that's where you're now rooted, married, kids, etc. But invest here, create companies here. Jim Cameron, the great film director, 40 years, 50 years now, he's been gone from Canada. He's not coming back. but he's become a major investor in he's a vegan and a big believer in the economics of plant-based protein. And he's become a big investor in Saskatchewan in plant-based protein. And one of the reasons he's so keen to do that is because he still carries his Canadian passport and is proud to be Canadian. We need to, the onus is on us to identify those people, know what their passions are, connect them with Canadians here and say, you know, you don't need to move back. If you want to, that's great, but invest here, build companies here, take us to your markets, introduce us to people there. This is all network thinking.
Thank you.
And I know you had other questions, Tony, but I'm mindful of the.
Thank you, John. If we had time at the end, I guess you can.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your time.
We'll see if we have time at the end. There are lots of senators lined up. Senator Jaffer, a question about Africa, which will be interesting, I'm sure.
John, I don't see John, but sorry, must be. Yeah. It's a real honor to meet you. Sorry you've had challenges lately. And I'm an Ismaili, and our leadership every Friday arranges sessions called Reflections. And your name has come up a number of times with regard to AKDN and also with your stand on immigration. So it's a real honor to see you today. I have a question that I've almost given up on, and that's the issue. But in Canada, we talk about values of equality and everything. But when we go abroad, our embassies don't really reflect that. And so I'm an African child, and I was born in Uganda. And my biggest angst, and I have fought with every ambassador in Kenya because that's where they're located, because they don't have an equal value for Asian Canadians who live there. And, you know, there are a very big Asian businessmen who don't get accorded Canadians who don't get accorded any respect. First time I went to Kenya as a senator, I found it very difficult because at the reception, it was supposed to be with Canadians, and there was nobody of color there. So, you know, it's a difficult issue, and I was reluctant as my first introduction to you to raise it, but to give you an idea how bad it is, I was in Kenya one year when there was an election, and I went to vote, and they insisted I stand in the Asian lineup to get in. Happily, I had the ambassador's phone, and I said to him, no, don't send an employee, come yourself, so that the staff knows there are Asian Canadians as well. And I, as a senator, was treated like that. What happens to, you know, Canadians? And so, you know, I'm wondering if you reach out to Canadians in East Africa or developing countries, because they're doing tremendous work there that can be a benefit to Canada, but we are missing out on that.
I think maybe a broader point, if I can respond to that, is our need. I refer to in the book as the new age of people power, and I clearly remember the people power movement of the 1980s, but this is a different kind of people power, and this is part of the network age. How do we think of diplomacy, that includes our embassies and missions, as instruments of people power, to make them more representative of the people, not just people on Canadian soil, but of Canadians out there, bringing those people in. We've been really, again, penny wise, pound foolish in terms of restrictions on what embassies can do, when they should be sort of the most sought after destination for anyone in a geography, but certainly Canadians and people in Canadians networks who want to gather and get a sense, as you say, of what Canada really is. It's not about the government. It's about the people of Canada as we span the world.
Thank you. Senator Ataullah Jan is next on my list, followed by Senator Cormier.
Thank you, Ratna. Nice to see you, John. My question is, a lot of countries have parliamentary secretaries or ministers that deal with, their overseas citizens. Do you think it's time for Canada to have maybe a parliamentary secretary that specifically looks after overseas, Canadians? We don't consider them an asset. And I know that when I have traveled with the Foreign Affairs Committee, we have met Canadians who are doing incredible jobs overseas. The embassies, bring a few of them in, and I'm always amazed at the work that they're doing and the positions that they hold. And my other question is regarding students, and I get this question in my office on a weekly basis, is Canada is making it very, very hard for students to get visas. Maybe I'm originally from Pakistan, so I get a lot of questions from there, but I have gotten questions from other countries in Africa too, where they feel that the students, it's very difficult for them. I mean, we should be welcoming students because they do bring a lot of money to the country too.
Yeah, not only, I mean, there's the economic uplift, but as we, seek, let me just step back and say our labor force growth, which is a key determinant of economic growth, is driven now entirely by immigration. And one of the trends we need to be mindful of coming out of the pandemic, two trends. One is baby boom retirement, which we've known is coming. It's begun. The years of acceleration are over the next 5 years. You see massive amounts of baby boom retirement, people leaving the labor force. Secondly, the post 9/11 baby dip. There was a drop off in birth rates after 9/11. That's going to play out now. So, and every school has seen this play out over the last 15 years. It's a smaller cohort coming into the labor force. So more people leaving the labor force, fewer people coming in. Just do the math. That means we need more immigration just to stay even in our labor force, which is a big driver of economic growth. So when we talk about growth, how we're going to get the economy going again, which we need to pay down the enormous debts that we've taken on, and for a whole bunch of other reasons as well. But immigration becomes even more critical. And students is one of the best channels that we have going for immigration, not only because they tend to be really good newcomers for all sorts of reasons. They are then labor force ready. As I like to say, we train people to survive 4 Canadian winters. what more can we ask for? If they endure these kind of winters, let them stay. Don't make it difficult. So big opportunity there, as well as challenges. I'm sorry. Remind me the first part of your question, because I got talking there.
It was whether we should have a parliamentary secretary for overseas Canadians.
I get the spirit of it. I think that's shooting too low. Our expat population are among the world's most sophisticated people. Almost by definition, they are at the top of their game, whatever their game is out there in the world. We need to engage them at the highest levels. I've suggested in the book that we create a unit within Rideau Hall, make the Governor General responsible for our global population. It's just one idea. It's open for debate, but give it that kind of stature, and that takes it away from politics. And David Johnson was terrific at this whenever he traveled the world, connecting. He really gets this issue. That's one way of elevating the status of this 11th province. Others have suggested putting it within ISED rather than foreign affairs, because it's a little more commercially minded and action oriented. So there's different options there. A parliamentary secretary may be fine. I just worry that just kind of relegates it down the chain of command in a way that may not be befitting of the sorts of people we really need to be connecting with on an active basis. But in the hands of the right person, it doesn't matter, because they'll just kind of get over it and make things happen, which is what you need most of all, as someone who will make things happen.
So, John, we're talking about 9% of Canadians are overseas. I think it's around 9%.
Yeah.
Who do they turn to? I mean, they know who to turn to if they're in trouble, but just to sort of connect, otherwise I find people don't know who to turn to. Thank you.
Yeah, but it can't be someone who cycles in like through every 18 months, because as you all know, then you're just learning the file and you're trying to position yourself for your next promotion. It's those would be concerns of mine as well.
So, John, I'm going to follow up on this question, if I may.
Yes.
What about a diaspora desk at GAC? Which is different. I mean, embedding institutional capacity that simply does not get, I mean, every government can choose to axe a desk or not. But I think if you embed things within the machinery of government, you have a greater chance of having longer term sustainability and success. Have you thought about that?
Yes, and I've spoken to Global Affairs about this. That could be terrific as well, Ratna. I mean, it just kind of baffled me as I was working on this book that I realized I'm the only person, not the only person, but suddenly become a leading authority on this topic. I thought there would have been a desk in the government responsible for this and a body of knowledge. And aside from groups like the Asia Pacific Foundation, as I mentioned, it's woeful. And if you like, India has a branch in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs responsible for overseas Indians. Other governments have a full, they call it a ministry. It may just be a desk, but they treat it seriously. Italy, I think there's 8 countries, Italy is among them, allows direct representation in Parliament. Maybe a step too far, but you get the point that other countries take this very, very, very seriously. And I hope whatever we do, there's good ideas here to be debated, but that it be held to that high standard that the expats have set for themselves and for the country.
Thank you. Senator Cormier, followed by Senator Wu.
Thank you, Senator Midvar, and thank you, Mr. Stackhouse, for your presentation. I really enjoyed the statement you made saying networks are more powerful than institutions. That's a good phrase for us senators. So my question is concerning the Canada U project. I'm wondering if you spoke with Canadian University on this. Like, I know they are all competing, with each other for students, particularly universities outside the big centers like Toronto and Montreal. So I wonder what kind of appetite do they have for this kind of project, and what would be for you the main obstacles to that?
So it's a great question. The globally influential universities, U of T, McGill, UBC, don't really like the idea because they feel at least my sense is they feel they're doing that already, and they want to protect their brand, their franchise. Right. I understand that, but they can grow their brand and franchise by being part of an even bigger brand or franchise. Even if you're U of T, if you're number 25 or number 20 in the league tables, you're still going after numbers 1 through 19, and you're probably going to do better against numbers 1 through 19 as part of a Team Canada. The smaller schools love it because it gets them the scale and the reach that they can't get on their own. I think we're at a really important moment here, not just for the Canada U idea, but for post-secondary education in the country, which needs reform. Everyone knows that. And I say this with great respect for our colleges and universities. The provinces are in deeply challenged fiscal situations and will be squeezing universities more and more over the next couple of years, I suspect. The feds are going to be putting more into, whether it's through provinces or through research funding, into post-secondary education. With all delicacies and due respect to the nature of the federation, I think there's an opportunity here for the federal government to use the power of the purse to bring people together, as we've done with healthcare, and say, let's make some fundamental changes here, folks. They're changes you want to make, but get colleges and universities and the provinces together. Say, like, we're not trying to tell the provinces how to run post-secondary education. We're just trying to enhance Canadian prosperity. And how do we do that, given all the funding we're about to put into it? So it's my sort of 2 cents, if you will, on the opportunity of the moment.
Thank you. Merci.
Merci.
Our second to last question, we're sort of coming almost to the end of our session, but we have time for for a few more questions. Senator Wu, who knows this very well
Yes.
because he used to head the Asia Pacific Foundation. Senator Wu, your questions, please.
I've been fearing this intervention since the start.
No, I congratulate you, John.
Senator, it's great to see you.
Good to see you too, John. And thank you for the shout out to the foundation. And you know that the pioneering work on this issue was done about 15 years ago.
Yes.
And I mention it only because the person who led the research, Professor Don Dvorets, passed away last year. Very, very sad. But the many figures you cited came from his pioneering work together with Kenny Chang. We started on this work over a decade ago, not from the pure angle of the talent of Canadians abroad, but from the anger we saw in Canada about what was then called return migration. This was the phenomenon of mostly Hong Kong immigrants who had come to Canada in the mid to late 90s, and then went back to Hong Kong, and now, as we all know, constitutes the largest group of so-called foreigners in Hong Kong, 300,000. That figure also comes from APF research. Mm-hmm. We like to say Hong Kong is the largest Canadian city outside of Canada. So my question to you, and it's really kind of philosophical, but I think it gets to the heart of the problem you've put your finger on. Why aren't we taking more use? Why aren't we tapping into this talent pool abroad? And, my own view is that Canadians have a lot of trouble reconciling themselves to the idea that we are not only a country of immigrants, but we're a country of emigrants. I feel like it offends the sensibilities of many Canadians to think that people who come to this country can have the audacity to want to leave it again and pursue their careers abroad, particularly those ingrates from Hong Kong or Lebanon or Kenya or France who come here and then go back to their home countries, their native countries, to pursue successful careers. I'm exaggerating, of course, but I don't think it's that far from the truth. And we saw that with the Michael Ignatieff fiasco.
Yep.
Why did Michael Ignatieff get vilified? Because he came back for us. You remember that, right?
Oh, yes.
And somehow we really resented the idea that somebody who taught human rights at Harvard would come back to Canada to run for politics. So until we deal with this real phobia and I would say small-mindedness, we're going to have a lot of trouble moving beyond and having the kind of approach that you advocate, which I support. And that explains precisely why, so far, when we have had government attention to Canadians abroad, I put it in the chat, we have had parliamentary secretaries for overseas Canadians. Mm-hmm. Arif Lalani was one, and we had the Conservatives had their own member as well. But you know what their job was? To deal with Canadians who get into trouble overseas. Yeah. So they define Canadians abroad as problems. So anyway, this is more of a reflection, and until we deal with this deeper issue, it's going to be very hard to move ahead.
No, thank you, and thank you for all the work you've done over the years, your leadership, not just on this issue, but more broadly, in enhancing our Canadian identity, if I can put it that way. And I think this really does cut to the core of that question of Canadian identity. I devote my conclusion in the book to the Harper-Ignatieff debate because I thought that was very, very telling. And Mr. Harper, in his book, Post Politics, writes about the somewhere people versus the anywhere people. And I think in that view, Canadians are from somewhere. I'm from this town, and it's a sense of identity, and it plays into identity politics versus the anywhere people who seem to not have an identity. They just want to live wherever is most convenient or pleasurable, and therefore have no investment in their place, no attachment, no obligation to a community. And I take issue with both, and I say Canadians we're not the somewhere people or the anywhere people, we are the everywhere people. You will find us everywhere, and we tend to fit in everywhere. And I don't mean that as a slight. We have an ability, I chalk it up to mutual accommodation. And that will be a real strength for us in the years ahead. And how do we promote this idea to Canadians, especially younger Canadians, that you can live and work everywhere and not lose an ounce of your Canadian identity? In fact, you'll probably become a stronger Canadian. And if you want to come back to somewhere, that's great. But if you don't, that's great as well. We just want you to stay Canadian. Or that person in Dubai who gets a Canadian passport and stays in Dubai and, you know, shuttles back and forth, sends a family here to Canada. They're not a carpetbagger. They're actually building a global business in Dubai. The only person making a mistake there is us, saying, hey, someone just joined our team here who knows how to run a business in Dubai. Let's ask them how we can go about things. I mean, you know all this. I know, but it's just something to stress that we need to put our collective voice to this idea of the everywhere people in a world where we are 0.5% of the world's population. We are not going to have more influence in the years ahead. We'll have less, no matter who's in government. This is basic math. So we have to network and network and network to build our influence.
That's great, John. So I get the privilege of asking you a few last questions. So someone talked about moving ahead. I think we're all sort of pretty engaged on this idea of how do we embrace Canadians overseas? How do we use their expertise, their capacity, their success to help Canada position itself? And how do we make that connection? And there have been a bunch of ideas. What do you think in terms of moving ahead? What do you think about a Senate Foreign Affairs Committee study on Canadian diasporas? Would that move the agenda? Has there ever been such a study on diasporas in either the House of Commons?
There have been, but there hasn't been one in a while. And just to marry that with another thought related to Pooh's question about citizenship in a digital age. Mm-hmm. So Canada's had a few evolutions of citizenship. In 1947, Citizenship Act, we take citizenship away from Britain and make it sovereign for us. 1977, we make citizenship about multiculturalism. That's when dual citizenship is introduced. Then Citizenship Act in 2011 starts to tighten it up. I consider that the kind of the post 9/11 age of citizenship. We have never kind of looked at citizenship in a digital age. And what does it mean in a world where we can live anywhere, work from anywhere? Can you be a citizen from anywhere? Estonia has kind of taken the most absurd example, but it's worth knowing, where all of us could apply for Estonian citizenship today and probably get it without ever having to go to Estonia. It's a bit of a gimmick, but it just, to me, illustrates how the mind can expand in terms of understanding this concept of citizenship in a digital or even virtual age. And maybe that's a way of kind of getting at this this question. The bureaucracy, Ratna, really struggles with this. I think that is partly because bureaucrats are bureaucrats, and this takes really some leaps of imagination. Politicians really are interested in the idea. You know, Chrystia Freeland and Minister Champagne and plenty of others. They've all lived overseas. They really get this, but it's not going to win them any votes, and they've got 100 other things to worry about, so they don't get to focus on it. So maybe this is where the body of sober second thought plays its greatest role, of being able to take an issue that needs more strategic thinking, more reflection. There's nothing really partisan about this. In fact, I've talked to many conservatives about this as being a very conservative idea. This is about individual franchise. There's actually a very conservative strain to the idea of expatriation. But there's also a lot of liberal thinking, small L liberal thinking in this as well. So I don't see this as partisan at all. And you know, maybe this group or a group amongst you could really take this forward, because it does need more study. There's some difficult issues that need to be debated. There's more research that needs to be done, and hopefully more ideas put on the table.
So colleagues who are on the call with us today, there's a challenge. What action do we want to take? And the instruments for taking action are well known to you. We may well get an inquiry out of this. Someone around the call may want to do that. Someone may want to table a motion. We have members of various committees. All of us sit on committees. Maybe the issue of a diaspora lens on foreign affairs or citizenship. These are all possible things. So the challenge is over to you, colleagues. You can act individually. We can sort of work on it collectively, but I look forward to your responses to this idea of how do we, as senators and the Chamber of Sober Second Thought, without we don't live under the electoral cycle. We have the patience and the time, and we can take the risks associated because we're not up for elected office, even if there is no risk there. So I look forward to actually taking this conversation, John, and getting back to you at some point with an action plan if one comes out of it.
No,
my final question
I'm here to help you in any way. And if I can just add a thought of encouragement, I've just been overwhelmed with the response to this from Canadians around the world. I've been speaking to groups in right around the world. I've got a call with India tonight I've talks, in Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, Dubai, London, LA, San Francisco, without ever leaving home. And there's a genuine excitement, but what's touched me most is hearing on social media from Canadians who I've never heard of, never met, usually doing something incredible somewhere, saying not only do they like the book or love the idea, invariably they sign off saying, "Sign me up. I want to be part of this. I want to help. I want to be part of this kind of Planet Canada." So there's a real kind of hunger out there among Canadians to be part of something. So if you do get going with this, I think you would find a lot of Canadians globally wanting to talk to you and help you.
Well, and we'll want to talk to you. So colleagues, with that, the formal part of our session is over. I'm going to close with an Amazon type message. If you liked this, you're going to like what we do next. And just to attract you to what we're going to do next, we will be hosting a session with the Chief Statistician of Canada, Anil Arora, and asking him to reflect with evidence on immigration and entrepreneurship, a key aspect of Canada's prosperity. But for that session, you actually have to be a member of our group, and we are so informal that all you need to do is send me an email, and that's it. That's it, colleagues, really. As you can see, we are very proactive, we are action-oriented, we want to get things done, but we also want to gain knowledge before we leap into the big unknown. Thank you, John. You are a thought leader. I hope you will say yes when we ask you again sometime in the future, as we well may. And thank you so much, and keep doing the amazing work. And thank you to you, colleagues. There were roughly 22 senators and staff from 21 offices. So, John, your ideas will have resonance. Thank you so much for everything
you so much.
you do for
Stay
Canada.
well.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Well done.
Thank you, Radna. Thank you, John.